It's the Antiques Road Trip.
Meanwhile, Marx made his way north of Leicester to look back at the history of rocketry, specifically how a British inventor developed the rocket which eventually led to man's voyage into space with a little help of some canine friends. Mark's meeting communications officer Josh Barker at the National Space Centre, one of the United Kingdom's leading visitor attractions devoted to space, science and astronomy.
Hello, Josh.
Hello, Mark.
Lovely to meet you.
Nice to see you too.
Thank you for inviting us to the Space Centre. Is that what it's called?
It is the National Space Centre, and you're very welcome. It's a pleasure having you.
Wonderful. Tell me about it.
So we were set up in 2001 as part of one of the Millennium Commission projects across the UK. We're a centre dedicated to educating and teaching people about space, specifically the British contribution to it.
Well, I know about the American and the Russian and maybe the European contribution, but the UK contribution?
But we are actually still world leaders in satellite technology, and British rocketry has been around for about 200 years.
200 years? I don't believe you, Josh. 200
years is correct. We've got some of the artefacts to prove that, which we'll show you today.
I'd love to go and see it.
Let's go and see them.
By the late 1700s, Indian forces had developed iron rockets from Chinese-invented fireworks. These were used against the British in the Mysore Wars. This, in turn, inspired one English inventor, Sir William Congreve, to develop the technology further to create the Congreve rocket.
So we have here some examples of some of Britain's earliest rockets.
It looks very Blue Peter to me.
They are very primitive compared to sort of the rockets that would go up into space.
William Congreve refined his rockets at the Royal Laboratory in Kent. In 1806, the rockets were used to great effect against the French at Boulogne, firing over 2,000 missiles from British ships without reply.
So these were used a lot by the British Army, the British Navy. They used them again in the Napoleonic era against Napoleon.
The Congreve rockets were also used by the British in the bombardment of Fort McHenry in the United States in 1814, an event that inspired the line from the American national anthem, "And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air." For the next 100 years, rockets played an increasing part in warfare, and it was in the Second World War that Britain found itself on the receiving end of the rocket's power. The Germans deployed the world's first long-range missile, the V2 rocket. It was used against Allied targets, most devastatingly in its destruction of great parts of London.
Well, what's this mangled piece of old metal?
So this is actually a bomb-damaged part of a V2 rocket.
The V2's greatest impact, however, may have been after the war.
The teams behind developing those and the technology was then used to develop our own rocketry programme to advance from the Congreve rockets we saw earlier, primitive ones that could barely reach a kilometre, to these ones which can actually get all the way up into low Earth orbit.
This was a turning point in rocket technology, as the need for longer-reaching missiles was replaced with the dream of reaching outer space, thus kick-starting the space race and a new age in which man would set foot on another planet.
So this is really the final chapter in sort of the story of early rocketry, and this is leads us to sort of the 1950s, 1960s, with the start of the space race. So the really big competition between Russia and America to get into space. And the Russians launched what was called the Vostok program.
The Vostok program was a project to put the first man into orbit. Competing against the United States, the Russians won the race, placing Yuri Gagarin into space in 1961. But before Gagarin launched himself into the history books, early test flights saw dogs blast off.
We can see here an example of a dog high-altitude suit.
Oh, gosh.
So this was sort of the preliminary tests of getting to see whether they could get the animals to survive sort of in high altitude, sort of in the area of fighter jets and things like that, ready to then make the next step up into space.
I must admit, that looks rather excruciating. The poor dog must have been terrified.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not sort of one of the rosier chapters of the space race. As with all things, there has to be some sacrifice.
Laika, a stray dog from the streets of Moscow, became the first animal to orbit the Earth and bravely paved the way for Yuri Gagarin's seminal journey into space.
Well, the wonderful thing, of course, is they say dog is a man's best friend, and I think in this case, they really are, aren't they?
I think they are. They really paved the way.
In just 210 years, from one British man's major contribution to rocket technology through advancements, first in warfare and then space exploration, we're now heralding the latest generation of rockets designed to carry astronauts to Earth's orbit and beyond. Who knows, without William Congreve, none of this would ever have been possible. And with that, our space odyssey is done.